Greetings, friends. I want to speak today about the role of the Christian, the believer, in this present world. Will it surprise you if I told you that the world needs us, but we also need the world? Many would agree with me when I say the world needs us, but there will be some who would say, do we really need the world? This sounds contrary to much of the preaching we may have heard, especially where texts or scripture verses such as, we're in the world but not of the world, do not be yoked with unbelievers, or come out from amongst them and be ye separate. Such scripture verses have their merit in the context in which they find themselves. For example, come out from among them and be separate. What did that mean? Was God saying that the children of Israel or the Israelites should never associate with other nations? No, he said, come out from amongst them and be separate. Because when the Israelites mingled with nations or ungodly nations around them, they became steeped in the idolatry of those nations. So that when God looked upon the nations of the world, he did not see any difference between his own people and that of the heathen nations around them. God's people became defiled. So when God said, come out from amongst them, it was not separation so much from the people themselves, but a separation from the system of the world, a system that defiled the people of God. So, in this teaching or short sermon, I give it a title called The World Needs Us and We Need the World. Jesus in Matthew 5 and verse 13 said, you are the salt of the earth. And if the salt lose its savor, meaning its saltiness or its ability to flavor, then it is useless and fit only to be trodden under the foot of men. Now notice with me that Jesus does not give any explanation for saying, you are the salt of the earth. That may be mainly due to the fact that in the days of Jesus, salt was such an important and necessary commodity that great value was attached to it. So great that it was even used as a currency in those days. Roman soldiers were paid with rations of salt. The word salary, as we understand it today, comes from its root word in the Roman Latin language, and the word there is salarium, which refers to the pay by means of salt quantities to Roman soldiers. Another interesting fact is that in those days, the word sugar didn't play such an important role. In fact, sugar is not mentioned in the Bible. The word honey and sweet is used instead. So by that, we have an indication that salt was the only alternate seasoning. So we find that Jesus told his followers, you are the salt of the earth. This then was a great compliment. What Jesus was saying is that your presence adds spice to an otherwise bland world. Friends, we need to be a presence in this world that will give taste to this world. The world needs the truth that we carry. And we need the world to live out this truth. The only purity the world would ever experience is the purity that God has put in us. You see, salt, as we understand it today, as long as it sits in the salt shaker, it is of little value to anyone until it is emptied. So too, Jesus means that our lives unless it is poured out into the surrounding culture, it is of little value to ourselves or to God, because we are called to flavor people. Jesus proved that. He proved it with his own lifestyle. He proved that it was possible to have contact with the world and yet not contaminated with the system of the world. That's why the Bible calls him the friend of sinners. You see, Jesus didn't teach his disciples an escapist mentality, especially when problems came around. He didn't teach them to run away and isolate themselves and protect themselves. Yes, he taught them to be wise as serpents and to be harmless as doves. But he adds the words, "But I send you forth as sheep amongst wolves." There's a certain guarantee in that. He says, you are the salt. First of all, it is not something that you do. It is something you are. Notice that very carefully with me. Because what we do will be of little value if it does not match up with what we are. He says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the presence that should make a difference. If you think about the prophets, they were the salt of the earth in the days they walked the face of the earth. Prophets were resented just because they symbolized truth. When people looked at them, people were convicted. You see, our lives is a lifestyle. As Christians, we are not called to be little sprinklers of salt. A little bit of Jesus sprinkled will make all the difference. That's not what we're called to do. Our presence should be a permeating presence. Our lifestyle should bring a conviction to other people. The way we live our lives, our very presence should be a rebuke to people. That when they look at us, they have to see what we are, and compared to the way they are, they ought to see what they ought to be. You see, the message that we carry is an invitation to come and identify with the sufferings of Jesus Christ. It's a call to be crucified. So then, we're called to be a presence in this world that makes a dynamic difference. The world needs us, friends, but we also need the world. And we need to live out the truth with commitment and with blamelessness. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, the last line of it, Jesus makes a very judgmental statement. He says, if the salt loses its savor, or its ability to salt, or its saltiness, its ability to flavor or to season, then there are eternal consequences for that. What Jesus is trying to say is that there are some substances, which when they become useless, can still be used for other purposes. If you take grapes, for example, sweet grapes, when they begin to rot, they can be used to be turned into wine. Sour grapes are used to make vinegar. And if it cannot be used for that purpose, it can be used even further to make fertilizer. So there are many things that become useless. Many things that could be used for many things, but when they become useless, they still could be used to do other things. But salt, which is a representation of your life and mine, we are the salt. When we lose our saltiness, our seasoning ability, then we become fit for nothing and should expect judgment. You see, friends, when salt loses its ability to savor, It is really a falsification of our discipleship. And insipid discipleship ceases to be an influence in society. It is a crime to mislead the world. The world needs us, and we need the world to fulfill our purpose. We're not called to become religious relics. We're not called to become a Christian museum. We're not statues on display. We are the salt of the earth. And let me say right now, very prayerfully, to Christians around the world, that if we are not sickened by the state of this world, then somehow we are as sick as this world. I trust that you have been truly challenged by the teaching or preaching of this word, that you rise up and begin to season the world around you. May God bless you as your faith arises. Please feel free to comment on our Facebook page, Christ Church Omega, or write to us via our email address, which comes up shortly after this sermon. Peace be to you. Amen.